They're the Eternal who's got to go fast. We're talking about Makkari. Hi, I'm Nando. In this series, I take a character from Marvel Comics to talk about their history, their power set, their personality, and I give you some reading recommendations. And that's all because this week, this character is being introduced into the collectible card game Marvel Snap. So if you've always wanted to know about this character, that's the first 80% of this video. Last 20%, we talk about the Marvel Snap card. So Makkari is interesting. Like, sure, Makkari has your average Eternal backstory. They were created by the Celestials millions of years ago. They were given the purpose of protecting humanity, kind of, or at least being around humanity, because the Deviants were going to get humanity. Another thing that the Celestials also made. And there were plenty of ulterior motives going on, but for most of their very long lives, that's what they thought they were supposed to do. They blended in with society. They took the place of human gods. They sometimes were superheroes. The Eternals. I will say Makkari is interesting for a couple of reasons. One, very important, and it's something that you're probably wondering right off the bat. In the comics originally, Makkari was a male Eternal. It wasn't until very recently, you could probably guess why, the character was reborn, which the Eternals frequently are, because they are Eternals, but they can die, they just get resurrected by a machine. And this time, when they got resurrected by the machine, a couple of the Eternals came out different. Makkari was a woman, and she had darker skin, although, I don't know, I feel like we haven't seen too much of Makkari since then, but I do think that's something they were going for with her. And then Ajak was also now a woman. This is because in the movie, they cast Salma Hayek to play Ajak and Lauren Ridloff to play Makkari, and you know Marvel, they love to sync up the comic stuff and the movie stuff. I think both of those actors were good. I like Salma Hayek a lot. I love her on 30 Rock. And Lauren Ridloff, one of the fresher faces on that team, but she was good in Sound of Fury. And that was also worked into her story because Lauren Ridloff, the actor, also deaf. So they wanted to make the Eternal, and this is in the movie. In the movie, the Eternal Makkari always was deaf and used sign language to communicate because they were able to run so fast they created sonic booms that would pop their eardrums. Why would the Eternals be manufactured as robots by the Celestials with all of these powers and purposes, and for some reason one of them just doesn't work with the it's a weird little answer, but it's fine. In the comics, the reason that happened is because all of the Eternals, spoilers for like a run that happened kind of recently, but doesn't really matter, all killed themselves and they all came back, but Makkari specifically had some trouble. You see, one of the most important things Makkari did in the 2000s Eternals runs is Makkari was the sole Eternal who was able to communicate with the Dreaming Celestial, which was a big giant celestial. Like, these Celestials are these humongous space gods, and this one was just living in San Francisco and it was stuck there and nobody knew what it was up to. Nobody could communicate with it, except Makkari was able to like mind meld with it, and it was able to talk to Makkari. So Makkari had this bond with the Dreaming Celestial, and it really messed with Makkari's mind. But when Makkari was reborn, they were reborn without this connection to the Dreaming Celestial. And so to get back in touch with the Dreaming Celestial, Makkari did so many things and tried everything. It eventually destroyed Makkari's hearing. I believe that is the in-universe explanation for why this Eternal cannot hear and why they speak with sign language, is because they were trying desperately to reconnect with the Dreaming Celestial, and apparently some of the things they tried ended up with their hearing being lost. It is now just kind of how that character works. So I'm gonna kind of refer to the character as they, just because in the beginning of the character's history, obviously he, and then obviously more recently and in the movie, she. But I don't think, it's not, like, as far as I can tell, like a plot point where Makkari's like, I want to be a woman. It's not like I wouldn't say it feels like it's an intentional thing. It almost feels like the comics knew that they didn't want to make it a big part of the character's history, because then that would be kind of complicated. So they just kind of tried to, oh yeah, no, these two are women now. Let's not talk about it again. As far as I can tell, this all comes in one of the Eternals offshoots that happened around the time of the Axe run. So there were a lot of things happening at once, and there's one point where Ajak and Makkari sit down and talk. Anyway, so Makkari likes to do human stuff. Makkari hangs out on Earth, does World War II stuff, teaches Elvis how to play the guitar, apparently. One thing that's very important that Makkari does is poses as a superhero, but not as Makkari or Mercury or whatever. Poses as apparently the son of Thor, pretends to be a character named Hurricane who fights, and this is like old school Captain America times. It's not very important, but it is something that Makkari did. And a lot of the Eternals did stuff like this. Gilgamesh fought alongside Hercules. And like while all of these stories in Marvel Comics were happening, there were characters that were the Eternals working in the background, or like working alongside the heroes that nobody knew that that's what they were. Makkari traditionally looks kind of specific. Usually they have a red and white block kind of suit with the, curvy lines and shapes and all that. They also wear a big hat, which not imagine, it has to be. Is it throwback to that, helmet that Mercury tends to wear, the god? And that is what this character's superpower is. They are the fast Eternal. I know what you're thinking. Isn't there an Eternal called Fastos? Yes, there is. But this Eternal is the one that is speedy. They love to run. It's all they do. They have been trying to crank up their speed since they were born. All the Eternals are created with all of the superpowers, so they can all fly and do laser beams and punch and use super speed and read minds. And then as they get older, they specialize and they decide which thing they really care about, and they're going to min-max their stats so that they're the fastest one. And that's what Makkari did. Now, I mentioned this in the Thena video because Thena is like the best warrior in the Eternals. It's hard to say whether Thena is the best warrior in Marvel Comics. Like, she's been living forever and she's got lots of skills. So you kind of assume she could at least hang in a fight with like Shang-Chi, Iron Fist, Black Panther, any of these other Marvel characters who are excellent fighters. But there's never been a tournament that she's a part of, so we've never had an official answer on whether Thena is the best fighter in the Marvel universe. Makkari we did. So in Quasar number 12, Quasar is this cosmic hero, has the quantum bands. He's hanging out with some other characters like the Squadron Supreme, and they're visited by an elder of the universe, so a character like the Grandmaster or the Collector, who is just focused on one thing, and they've been around since the beginning of creation. This one's called the Runner, and he's just a guy who loves to run, runs real fast. So the Runner sets up this race to the moon, gets all of the superheroes that could do this. At the time, there's certain speedsters that exist now that weren't involved with this, like North Star and Aurora weren't there. Speed wasn't there because he didn't exist at the time. The main characters you can recognize are Makkari, obviously, the Whizzer, the Golden Age speedster, Speed Demon, another speed character, now part of the Squadron Supreme, Squadron Sinister, like that group. Quicksilver, obviously, is there. And Spectrum is there because Spectrum can move at light speed. And the Runner makes this point, it's like, you do have to touch the ground a couple times. Otherwise, what you're doing isn't really running. So I'm going to make sure you're touching the ground. Otherwise, you'll get disqualified. And there's two other guys who aren't really good, and they immediately lose. And they're like, I don't know why I'm even here. I'm a sprinter. I'm not good for distance running, but whatever. They have to fill this group out. So they all start running. Makkari's doing okay. Overtakes everybody else, is about to win this race, when then a person explodes into the universe with electricity, and they've got all kinds of tattered clothes and disheveled hair, and they just run through this race. They beat everybody and they win the race. And this guy, everybody's like, who are you? And he says, I don't remember my name. I don't think I'm from here. As far as I can remember, my name is Buried Alien or something like that. And everybody goes, well, this guy's pretty fast. Makkari's like, I definitely would have won, and he doesn't count because he's not from our universe. But this guy is technically the fastest. Now, obviously, this is supposed to be a Barry Allen in everything but name. But this is, what if Barry Allen got transported to this universe? Barry would be the fastest one that exists, which is cute. The only other time I can think of that something like this happened is in the Justice League versus Avengers event back from the late 90s, early 2000s, whenever that was. And in that, I believe Quicksilver was able to beat the Flash in a race in the DC universe because Quicksilver was able to tap into the Speed Force, and that made Quicksilver more powerful. It's just a kind of interesting thing of one of you're faster in the universe you're not from, it seems like. But either way, this is the only time we've had the Eternals all get in a big competition with everybody else and determine that, yes, Makkari is the fastest character outside of the Elder of the Universe, the Runner, in the Marvel Comics universe. Makkari even trained up later and beat the Runner in a foot race, so Makkari did prove themselves to be the fastest character in Marvel Comics, which I think is cool. So like I said, in the 2000s, all the Eternals get their minds wiped. They get regular jobs. We've talked about this in everybody else's video. Makkari was a medical student named Mark Curry. Ha ha ha. Actually, honestly, out of all of these names, that's the one that I'm like, I could meet a guy named that and go yeah, sure, that seems like a normal human name, as opposed to some of the other ones, which we'll get to next week. But he's approached by Icarus. Icarus is like, you're an Eternal, don't you remember? Makkari and Cersei have a relationship. This is an on and off thing throughout the comics. Cersei has plenty of relationships with other characters, but I would say her relationship with Makkari is perhaps her most significant. The two move in together, and this is when the Dreaming Celestial stuff is really starting to mess with Makkari's brain. So much so that Makkari and Cersei this creates a rift in their relationship. But Makkari keeps doing this job and it's working. And the Eternals are a very religious organization, especially Ajak and Makkari are kind of treated as prophets and priests. So this is the best. You want to be the mouthpiece of God. I mean, like, it's kind of, it gets at Makkari, and like it's a lot of responsibility, but at the same time, like, this is kind of what these guys are built for. Fast forward, there's a big war between the Eternals. Like, a lot of the Eternal stories, even though there are deviants and all kinds of space monsters, a lot of the Eternal stories are just Eternals fighting other Eternals. Druid gets a bunch of the villain Eternals, Icarus gets a bunch of the hero Eternals, and they fight Ajax, who is another player, a third party in all this. It's like, I always hated that Makkari got to talk to our god. It really bugged me because that's always what I wanted to do. So Makkari hires Gilgamesh, kind of tricks Gilgamesh into thinking he has to kill Makkari, and then Gilgamesh does kill Makkari. And then when they're trying to resurrect Makkari, Gilgamesh kills Makkari again and breaks the machine so they can't resurrect Makkari. This is when Circe uses her power transmutation to turn herself into a perfect copy of Makkari, and now Makkari exists again, and that's what they do. And that's the stuff that happened in like the 2000s, 2010s with Makkari. The most recent thing that happened with Makkari is that story that I was saying before, where Makkari was resurrected as a woman eternal after they all committed suicide and died, and decided to try to contact now, not the Dreaming Celestial, because the Dreaming Celestial was destroyed, but the other Celestial that the Avengers were using as their house. And Makkari became so obsessed with it and tried everything. And during that process, they became deaf or lost the ability to hear. And they buried the hatchet with Ajax, kind of. Makkari is a pretty significant character in the movie The Eternals, because Makkari is the coolest one, because they do super speed, and it's maybe the best time super speed had been done on camera, definitely at that point. The fight scene between Makkari and Icarus, and just anything Makkari is doing in that movie, looks great. Makkari has a relationship with Druid. That's something that definitely would never have happened in the comics, because Druid really is like a bad guy Eternal through and through, and he's conniving all the time. There's other Eternals like do bad guy stuff, but Druid is like their Loki or their Maximus the Mad. The idea that those two would have a relationship and flirt is unusual. I would say personality wise, Makkari's kind of normal. They're ambitious. They like to race. They've got a lot of spunk. They like to be part of Eternal stuff. They've got the kind of eternal holiness to them where they love to communicate with the gods and stuff, but that connection obviously takes a toll. They have pretty meaningful human relationships. I would say Makkari, as opposed to definitely Circe and Gilgamesh, does not have as many run-ins with other Avengers. Makkari was never on the Avengers or anything like that. All these Quasar adventures are probably the closest Makkari has to some sort of breakout comics moment. As far as reading recommendations, I would say the main one is Quasar Volume 1, Issue 17. It's written by Mark Grunwald with art by Mike Manley, Paul Becton, and Janice Chang. This is a story with the race. This is a perfect Makkari story. It's one comic. It's very simple. It covers everything that they did in this story. I would say as far as other Makkari stories, Eternals Volume 3. This was written by Neil Gaiman with art by John Romita Jr., Danny Mackey, Tim Townsend, Matt Hollingsworth, Dean White, Paul Mounts, and Todd Klein. This is a very Makkari-focused story, and everything in the 2000s, I would say, has a lot of Makkari in it. And then if you want something recent, I would say Eternals Celestia. This is the Ajax and Makkari story. This is written by Karen Gillan with art by Kai Zama, John Livesay, Matthew Wilson, and Clayton Cowles. This gives you a little bit of background on Makkari and Makkari's headspace currently in the comics, which is, it's interesting. They're in an interesting spot. But I would say you can read any of those other stories that I've mentioned and get a good sense for what Makkari's up to. Like any story since the 2000s, except for the most recent run, which doesn't have a ton of Makkari in it, has a fair amount of Makkari. They weren't the main character necessarily, but I think they were treated as maybe the POV character for a couple of these books, because they were just kind of not a blank slate, but they were just kind of some Eternal, it's simple, easy to understand power, who seems to know the other ones, has history, but isn't too complicated to understand. In Marvel Snap, Makkari is a 3-cost 4 power with the ability, after this turn, runs from your hand to a random location if possible. Lore-wise, this makes sense. People had suggested that Quicksilver or some of the other speed cards could have an ability like this, where they just immediately leave your hand and go to the field. As far as functionality is concerned, I don't think this card is incredibly useful. A 3-4 isn't great. I think like even a 3-5 would be something that would be maybe a little more viable. The fact that you can't control where Makkari goes, I don't love, because Makkari isn't just fast. She's the fastest speedster in Marvel Comics. I kind of figured you'd be able to pick where she goes. Like she would just be a 0-cost kind of treated like that. But I get it. It's a power that people wanted a card to have for a while. I don't think she's going to be incredibly viable in the meta, just because Cerebro 4 isn't a deck you hear too much about, and she's going to take up space, but because you don't know where she's going to go, it just makes it a little trickier to plan around her and to say we want to put these cards here and then we'll put a card here. But then Makkari shows up, boom, takes that spot, and then, you're kind of out of luck. And the Cerebro decks are never great, but I'd say Cerebro 2 has a really good thing going right now. Cerebro 3 is where all the counters are, so I like Cerebro 3. And I didn't love her there, but I think it could have worked. And then Cerebro 5, I would say sometimes because of certain cards like Captain Marvel, Doctor Doom, you see some play. She is a 3 cost, so she could fit into a Silver Surfer deck. But again, the question is she worth that deck spot of just getting a character onto the board for free? I don't know. I think it's hard to justify. Out of all the Eternals this season, and including Airsham, who I think is a fun card, but probably isn't going to be an awesome card to play, I do think Makkari feels like the weakest one, which is a shame because Makkari is in the week with one of my favorite variants of this season. And also, here's the bit in every episode where I complain about the lack of variants, because again, there's aren't enough variants for the Eternals, especially because Makkari has so many different looks. There's no male Makkari right now in the cards, and there's so much history of this Makkari costume with this big kind of, Lance Armstrong, biker helmet thing. So that could be fun. I understand why they maybe want to focus on one look for the Eternal, just so people don't get confused. But I mean, I don't know. There should just be more variants because these are Jack Kirby characters, man. Jack Kirby drew these guys. John Romita Jr. drew these guys. They have some pretty cool arts that I would love for them to incorporate into Marvel Snap. But I will say, there's a Gladiator variant this week that is fine, and then there's the X-23 Hellfire Gala variant, which I love. And back when MODOK was in this cache, because I have to get all the MODOKs, I was just going to get Makkari and be like, well, at least I'll probably get that Hellfire variant, but now probably not. I do think that just it's such a cool looking card. So yeah, so far, this is one I'm least excited about. I think the lore is fine. I think maybe if they buff it, it'll see more play. But I would be surprised if Makkari has a huge impact on the meta. And besides that, if you like these videos, share them. Thanking everybody on the subreddit and in chat groups and stuff who shares these and comments on them. I appreciate it. Also, Marvel Snap, if you guys want to put me in the partner program, I don't know. I've, made lots of videos and I have applied, but I haven't heard anything back. So I don't know. It'd be cool if you guys let me in, but yeah, whatever. That's maybe just not what we're doing, I guess. Besides that, next week, we're talking about Fastos. So that will be fun. And if you're watching this on YouTube, that means that we'll be on Nebula right now because these go up on Nebula a week early. Use my code. It's in the description. Besides that, thank you everybody for watching. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.